What is going on, everyone? Welcome into the Brand Partial Show. So another big win for Colorado as they get a nice 36-7 win over Nebraska. So Deion Sanders, it's crazy. It just goes to show, here's the thing with college football and the Colorado Buffaloes. They're just the example of when you get true difference makers overnight in the portal, and you get a coach that's hungry and believes, Colorado, USC are examples of there is no 2-3 year rebuilds anymore. There's no more excuses in college football. You can get it done overnight, and Colorado's doing that. So let's talk about that game a little bit. So Colorado didn't play very well to start the game. Colorado's offensive line is not elite by any stretch of the imagination. Their defensive line is not great. So I think that's what's going to come back to haunt Colorado. But I think that haunt them. I think that's what's going to get them to drop a couple games, and most likely that probably will hold them back from winning the Pac-12 as far as this year. But, man, Shedeur Sanders just lighting it up in the Heisman race, rightfully so. Michael Penix Jr. from Washington, too, in the Heisman race. We'll kind of discuss that in a moment. But, yeah, Shedeur Sanders, man, he is balling out. And Dylan Edwards looks good. They had a really nice interception. Nebraska really cost themselves with some of those fumbles. But, yeah. Coach Prime, Colorado 2-0 start, and the excitement is already there. It's just kind of crazy. The success, basically almost overnight, getting a few key guys, getting the fans excited. This is a program that's, looks to be really revived, and they've already won more games through 2 games this year than they won all of last year. So credit Coach Prime, credit this Colorado team, and credit that they – it's one of those. That was one of those games where you hear people. I think it was McAfee was like, "This is a trap game for Colorado," and I kind of had a weird feel before that game that they were going to lose that game because it kind of had all the makings for a letdown. You get a huge Week 1 win. Everyone's talking about you, telling you how great you are. Over a team that played in the national title, and then you come out Week 2 against a Nebraska team who came off a heartbreaking loss to Minnesota, a Nebraska team that's kind of trying to find their footing under first-year coach Matt Rule, a guy who's a proud coach in the NFL, did a good job of turning around Baylor. So you go out there and you drop that in. You get it done after you struggle early. So you have some adversity early on. Shedeur Sanders kind of finds a rhythm. The defense is able to get you some turnovers, get you in good field position, and then the defense is able to play and execute at a high level throughout the course of 4 quarters in that game. So, yeah, Colorado, excellent win. I thought, the last thing I wanted to touch on that, you're going to have days where, your offense isn't executing at a high level. You're going to have to rely on some turnovers you're going to have to rely on some turnovers, your defense. You're going to kind of have to win ugly. Not necessarily that they won ugly because they did establish an offensive rhythm, but sometimes you're just going to have to, it's not always going to be smooth sailing when you're winning. Every national title team had kind of that one game where their offense hit a little bit of a lull. It's not always all systems go, and you're not always looking like a well-oiled machine each game. You're gonna need some kind of things to happen, and that really certainly happened for Colorado as they get an excellent 36-7 win over Nebraska. All right, so let's shift to, we'll talk a little bit Michigan, UNLV. So Michigan really just handled their business in this game. UNLV, I thought, fought hard in the first half. I thought that they understood they were overmatched at the line of scrimmage. They understood that Michigan, this is an excellent all-around Michigan team with a J.J. McCarthy at quarterback who's executing and playing at a high level. So UNLV just understood that this was going to be they understood this was going to be a tough game, and Michigan really has it rolling. They look fantastic. I know it's 2 opponents that they really should beat handily, but I think there's always things that, just because you're playing a non-Power 5 school that you're favored to get, by 30 points against, it's not always guaranteed that you're going to go out and just you're just going to execute and roll that team. So Michigan credit them for going out, handling their business, just playing at a high level, not taking the opponent for granted by any means. So J.J. McCarthy, just super efficient. I think he broke a record through the first game and a half as the most efficient quarterback in Michigan football history. So, yeah, credit McCarthy for his play, and his leadership looks excellent. Jack Tuttle appears to be the backup quarterback for Michigan. Looks like he's won the backup job. Davis Warren, kind of that third guy. And, yeah, Michigan defense looks strong. I worried about the secondary a little bit, but, yeah. Secondary looks fine. Defensive line looks good. Chris Jenkins is just a man amongst boys. One of my favorite defensive players in the country. Going to be one of the top defensive tackles for the 2000 that's eligible for the 2024 draft. So Michigan gets a nice win over UNLV with Jay Harbaugh coaching in the first half, and then Mike Hart coaching in the second half. So Michigan moves to 2-0. They'll play Bowling Green next week. So let's talk a little bit Alabama, Texas. So Texas 34-24 win over Alabama. And this game, to me, it did kind of go similarly to last year's game. I think it was a lot like last year's game in a lot of ways, to be honest. It was, you kind of had the feel, except this year was the game went similar to last year's game, except this year, you kind of had the feel that Texas was in control of the game. I kind of had the feel last year, especially later in the game, that Alabama was in control. You feel like Texas was in control of the game, especially kind of in that, especially when they got to when it was 34-24, and Texas kind of was breaking off some big runs, key runs with number 24. You felt like it was in hand, and I just wanted to say this about Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers is, to me, that's the ultimate example of, quietly overcoming adversity, if you will. Because, Texas, if you rewind, Texas, when they landed Arch Manning, there was a lot of people that were like, that was the constant talk. Arch Manning, he, how good's he going to be at Texas? Him and Sarkisian, going to tear it up in that offense. He's a Manning, all that talk. And Quinn Ewers just quietly, cutting his hair, getting in fantastic shape, training, putting aside all that noise and that buzz, and just going out and doing what he needed to do, executing at a high level, making key throws, playing within this offense, and getting a huge win at Alabama in week 2 over the number 3 ranked Alabama Crimson Tide. So credit Quinn Ewers. Quietly, that is a great story about him going through adversity and really shining and making the most of an early opportunity. But yeah, now the question for Texas remains kind of the question that's always been there is, okay, we have established we can bring in key players. Last year, Bijan Robinson, he's no longer there, but we got Worthy, Quinn Ewers, Jatavion Sanders, A.D. Mitchell. Had some big plays in this game. He looked really good, the transfer from Georgia. So we've established we got playmakers. Can we sustain this now? Can we just win? Can we not drop the games where we're not favored in? Like last year against Texas Tech. Like they should not. There's no reason they should lose that game. Texas, really, this is a Texas team that, going undefeated is tough, but this is really a Texas team where probably Oklahoma is the only team that really should be close with them as far as matching up talent-wise. Texas should really, ideally, win the Big 12, and this should be a playoff team, especially the way they played last night. If they can sustain and be consistent playing like that, then this is a playoff level caliber team. So yeah, Texas, massive win. Happy for Steve Sarkisian. I think if you flip to the Alabama side, a lot of the buzz is going to be Nick Saban is the dynasty over. That's going to be a lot of the main topic of discussion when it comes to Alabama. But to me, I think that I don't think the dynasty is necessarily. I don't think the dynasty is over. I think it's just a I think what's happening with Nick Saban is there's a lot of good coaches in college football now, and a lot of guys that have kind of figured out the recruiting. So Alabama, if you look, Alabama probably was getting whoever they wanted a few years ago, from 2014 to 2017 when they really were, that probably was the peak dominance of the Nick Saban dynasty. Obviously they didn't win it all, and they didn't win it every year in that 4-year span. But if 2015, 2017 they did, and they were getting elite quarterback play, and it seems like they were just getting whoever they wanted in recruiting and via a JUCO guys. So now you fast forward the transfer portal. I mean, look at what USC does. They got a whole new front 5, 6 front. 4 new defensive linemen and a new linebacker. So the portal just kind of, to me, in my opinion, I think the portal is, I think recruiting in the playoff was kind of you're kind of seeing, just 2 or 3, 4 really dominant teams. You're getting just a few really elite teams, Clemson, Alabama, Georgia a few years ago. But now I think what the portal is, it's helping, the good teams become really good. Like Florida State, that's taking them up a notch. USC, I know Lincoln Riley, it was going to make them good, but I think the transfer portal really is taking them up a notch as far as, kind of getting close to resembling what Pete Carroll did, bringing in talented defensive linemen. So, yeah, Nick Saban kind of his, having a tough time navigating the world of NIL transfer portal. It's not just making recruiting was kind of making Clemson and Alabama the top of the top. Now the transfer portal kind of opening the door for some of the other programs. But yeah, we'll shift to USC. USC, a huge win over Stanford, and yeah, that's what I want to talk about. Lincoln Riley getting the job done in the transfer portal, and he is, boy, what an excellent job of recruiting via the transfer portal. They got exactly what the doctor ordered. Bear Alexander looks excellent at the defensive tackle position. Mason Cobb has been outstanding. I don't think he played last night. I didn't see him, but then Gentry, the true freshman. So USC last year, to me, Lincoln Riley played out last year exactly like he needed. He understood that, okay, this is USC. We're going to have some talented guys. You got a guy like Taj Washington, a talented receiver. You're bringing in Damani Jackson. But he understood that we need a elite level quarterback, and I can bring Caleb Williams with me. We need a talented receiver. I can bring Mario Williams with me. The offensive line, defensive line, we can't hit on. We're not going to be able. It's kind of late. I guess at that point it wasn't too late, but I think he didn't realize that how far removed the USC offense and defensive line play was from the Pete Carroll era. It was not. It was really down. I know they had some guys like Tui Peloto. It wasn't all bad on the defensive line, but I think last year was really trying to establish, get his offense into play, establish a nice offensive system, and then kind of taking that year to assess and realize what we got to do in year 2 as far as to really get this ship completely in the air, or get this rocket completely in the air. So USC now, they have done an excellent job of getting guys that exactly what they needed. And Caleb Williams looks smooth out there. Just like the announcers are saying, that the USC offense is just like, it is just so quarterback friendly. There's guys open, and then now you got a guy like Zachariah Branch, who's just an explosive playmaker in the return game and at wide receiver. So yeah, USC really got it rolling. Credit Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley, he is the man. And USC moving to 3-0 already. They've already. It's hard to believe they've already played 3 games. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, nice win for USC. It's kind of sad to see Stanford, a really struggling program. If you remember under Jim Harbaugh, they were really turning things around. They had some nice years under David Shaw. Now just not the program they once were. But good for Stanford. I think Stanford really had that era. That era will really help get people to remember that era of Jim Harbaugh, David Shaw is still recent enough where people remember the good times of Stanford, because before that era it was people, Stanford kind of reverting back to their old ways of the 90s, 2000s, even late 2000s, and that's an era of football people don't want to remember. But at least some of the good times are fresh in people's mind. But yeah, Stanford. I know it's still early in this season, but yeah, Stanford's certainly not the program they once were a few years ago. So yeah, we'll shift. So LSU rebounded big with a win over Grambling. I think it was good. It's good for their confidence to get in the win column, and that was an excellent job doing so, beating Grambling. I know Grambling, not an elite team by any stretch of the imagination, but credit Grambling was moving the ball early. LSU made some adjustments. I thought their offense got into a rhythm. They made some big plays with Malik Neighbors. Looked like they limited the drops, and Logan Diggs had an excellent game too. He's a super talented running back, runs with patience, some power, strength element to his game, so he did a nice job. So yeah, LSU goes out, takes care of business, 63-10. They get a nice win over Grambling. So yeah, and so we'll talk some of the Heisman right now. So Michael Penix had a really big game, 400 yards, 3 touchdowns against Tulsa. I love watching Michael Penix play. Just when he throws it like an NFL quarterback. His confidence looks like an all-time high this year. To me, he always is a guy that has really trusted his arm. Even to go back to Indiana, he's always really had a lot of faith that he can make some big-time throws, and that's exactly what he's done this year. So credit him. He's going to be in the mix. Yeah, the Heisman conversations is going to be super hype. Shadur Sanders, Caleb Williams will be in the mix. It'll be hard to believe that he'll win it 2 years in a row. And then Bo Nix will be in the discussion as well. Quinn Ewers, this will be an interesting NFL draft, because they love to talk about the quarterbacks. There'll be a lot of discussion about the quarterbacks eligible for the 2024 NFL draft. So let's talk a little bit. So I wanted to talk Oregon escapes Texas Tech last night, and to me that is an example of just strange things tend to happen in Lubbock, Texas Tech, and credit Oregon for getting a fantastic win in that game. That was that's a game where I'm sure Dan Lanning will tell his team, he's such a positive guy and looks at the good in a lot of situations. He'll tell his teams that's a game that's going to happen. He preaches good as the enemy of great. If you want to be great, those are some of the tests you're going to have, especially on the road at Texas Tech, where it seems like strange things just tend to happen in Lubbock, as they say. And you're going against Tyler Shuck, a former Oregon quarterback, guy that was hungry to really go out and beat his old team. So Oregon gets the win, 38-30. They escape, get an interception on that late, kind of, Hail Mary, if you will. And Oregon just getting things done. And Oregon going to play Colorado in 2 weeks. That'll be interesting. I guess, to me, I think at this point with Colorado, you would say that they are for real. But if you want to say that they are for real, they go out at Oregon in 2 weeks and they get a resounding win, like they win handily over the Ducks, then I think that's when you sound the alarms that maybe Colorado has a chance to do something special this year. Because Oregon, even though Oregon may not be the best team they play, I think Oregon, just how good they are, how talented they are all around, in the challenge that they'll face, being a little bit of a mismatch in the sense that Oregon has a big physical defensive line, guys like Brandon Dorlus. I think if Colorado can win that game and play well at the line of scrimmage, then I think that's that's when you say Colorado has a really legitimate chance to win the Pac-12 championship. So keep an eye on that game in a couple weeks. Colorado going to play Colorado State, but then they have a meeting with Oregon 2 weeks from now, which should be super, super exciting. What else do we want to talk about? Virginia. So, yeah, Virginia upset by James Madison. And James Madison, man, they seem to be, I know Virginia's not great this year, but I would not want to schedule James Madison if I was a college football program. James Madison just seems to just be that team that just thrive to upset the Power 5 schools. So I would really, if I'm a college football team, I'm really avoiding scheduling James Madison. But yeah, excellent. Nice win for James Madison. I was surprised yesterday they were favored. They were the favorite over Virginia. I thought that was really interesting. Excellent. Nice week 2 of college football. I thought there were some pretty good matchups. The next game I wanted to hit on. So Miami gets a nice win over Texas A&M. I thought that this game was, you talk about USC and you talk about them kind of, starting to look more like the Pete Carroll. Now, you always, as a coach, if you're Lincoln Riley or if you're Mario Cristobal, you don't always want to be compared to some of the good eras because I think a lot of people kind of want to be unique. But I think as far as Miami's concerned, I think that, Miami needs to embrace being compared to some of the glory days of the 80s and the early 2000s team. And I think that, not necessarily did they look that way, but I think that they played in a way where, they haven't had a really good NFL quarterback for a long time. The last guy that got drafted they were talking about was Brad Kye. I think Miami should embrace the fact that they're scoring points and they played at a high level, got turnovers. I think that's the Miami people want to see. Under Mark Richt, they had a couple nice seasons a few years ago, but Miami, they weren't always winning. It wasn't always the prettiest, best display of offense, if you will. So Mario Cristobal, Tyler Van Dyke at quarterback, and them really getting their offense, going full throttle and getting plays on defense. Even though if they're giving up points, I think that's kind of the style. That is kind of the golden identity, the golden era identity of Miami football, if you will. So Miami, you got to like the direction they're heading under Mario Cristobal. And like people touch on, he is an intense dude. He does seem, to me, he does seem like the right guy for the job. Now, I don't think he'll, is Miami going to become a super, playoff contender, ACC champ, year in and year out? Maybe not, but I think under Mario Cristobal, the floor is pretty high that this is going to be a really good team. And that's an excellent win over a Texas A&M program that is really hungry to show something this year. They took a lot of I won't say drastic measures, but they took some. They did their due diligence, hiring assistant coaches, bringing in guys like DJ Durkin and Bobby Petrino, guys that have a track record. I guess DJ Durkin was there, but they brought in Bobby Petrino to try to maximize this roster. And I don't think A&M has I don't think they really have a roster of super elite players, but it is a good roster nonetheless. But Miami, I think they are starting to. You look at this recruiting class, and I think they have done a good enough job to really do something special this year. That's a really good win over Texas A&M and Miami. You don't want to. Still it's week 2, 3-ish. You don't want to overreact, but Miami definitely. I kind of feel the same way about Miami as Texas with their wins. It's kind of they are headed in the right direction. We'll just see if the car can take off full speed and they can stay in the lane and stay at a consistent speed. So good wins, very good wins for Texas and Miami yesterday, kind of setting the tone, if you will, for things to come. So. But Colorado, Oregon, going to be a really hotly contested matchup in a couple weeks. I got to take a look. I got to take a look at some of the big games next week. I think there's going to be certainly. I think there is. Is it Notre Dame, Ohio State? I think is next week. That'll be a really good game. Week. That's what's good about college football. There's a lot of big schools playing the small. There's a lot of blowouts through these first 3 weeks, but there's also some key matchups as well that people love to see. Last year, so many people watched Texas and Alabama, and this year there's a chance. This year, I'm not sure what that game did as far as for amount of people watched, but I think it had a chance to really do some big numbers this year. And But Michigan. Some other scores: Michigan State big winner over Richmond. Purdue looked like Purdue got a nice win over Virginia Tech. Purdue trying to rebound and after they lost to Fresno State. I'm thinking with Purdue, was Purdue kind of an example of, was that just the Fresno State's been pretty good. You hear lose to Fresno State and you immediately think that's a bad loss, but Fresno State actually been a pretty good program the last few years. To me, that's one of those. Does Purdue have that? They could be one of those Big Ten teams where they have that loss, but then bounce back and have a really nice season, win some games. I don't know if that's a sound the alarm loss, especially after they rebounded and beat Virginia Tech. So a nice win to try to bounce back from a tough loss like that to Fresno State. People forget this is a Purdue team. I know they didn't have the best, their last two showings were not very good against Michigan and then LSU in the bowl game. They really got beat pretty handily. But, this is a Purdue team quietly, 8-5, 8-6 last year, a team that played for a Big Ten championship. So, Jeff Brom done a really good job in establishing a solid program there. So, yeah. Next thing, so let's talk about Notre Dame gets a huge win over NC State. I think with Notre Dame, what's key with Notre Dame is Sam Hartman playing well, but I think Marcus Freeman, the way Notre Dame's playing, Marcus Freeman has this Notre Dame team really believing, and I think they're fully bought in. Not that when they got off to that, was it 0-2 start last year, they weren't believing, but I think that they were just trying to figure out, I think it was kind of the hangover of the Brian Kelly era, and I don't mean that in a bad way because Brian Kelly did an excellent job, but that's kind of the feel when you get a new coach there. They have to establish kind of their own identity, and they have to, the players have to adjust to the new coaching staff, and there's not really that full belief, that full buy-in as of yet. But right now, the way Notre Dame's playing, there is that full buy-in and belief, and they are anchored by a strong quarterback in Sam Hartman, a guy that has a lot of experience and did some really nice things at Wake Forest in 2021 and 2022. So, Notre Dame gets a huge win over NC State. That was a game, you get the feel they might have dropped that game just because NC State, a pretty strong team over the last couple of years. It's one of those, to me, that's one of those games where you think, people for kind of, if you're a casual college fan, you think, oh, they're playing NC State. NC State, okay. NC State quietly been a pretty good team. That is and Notre Dame to beat them handily in bad weather conditions. That's credit where credit's due, and a nice win for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish there. But Notre Dame week 0, they get that win over Navy, and you're thinking, it's an okay win. But for Notre Dame now, you're really starting to think that, man, Notre Dame, there's something special brewing, and that week 1 or that week 0 win against Navy, in that win against NC State, they're not certainly not flukes by any stretch of the imagination, and that Notre Dame is moving in the right direction. This is going to be a really strong program under Marcus Freeman, recruiting well. They're going to bring in some talent next year in the recruiting class. So Notre Dame, but to me, they're kind of at an interesting place because Notre Dame, they're kind of thinking that, at this point, if you're overreacting and you're trying to get carried away, you might be, as a Notre Dame fan, you might be thinking that, Brian Kelly was the problem, and this thing is going to get fully rolling, and Notre Dame's going to be, if they do go 11-1, 12-0, and get to the playoff, we'll see them win a playoff game and be a national title contender. If it's not this year, next year, but also at the same time, you're thinking, maybe Notre Dame is maybe Marcus Freeman has them exactly where they were under Brian Kelly. Now, I'm not going to say that they are going to for sure lose in the playoff, but for them to in a year, about a year removed from Brian Kelly, for them to immediately take another step, might be tough. Because, Notre Dame, even though Marcus Freeman, it appears he's kind of taken another step in recruiting, Notre Dame, still a tough place to recruit and still a tough place to win. And, especially, it's kind of been flipped. Things have kind of flip-flop as far as Brian Kelly and Notre Dame when you compare those two, because you look at Notre Dame, the start they got off to. I know LSU didn't start the best, but LSU last year wins the division in Brian Kelly's first year, and then Notre Dame kind of struggled, especially in the beginning under Brian Kelly. So you're thinking, maybe it wasn't Brian Kelly the problem. But now at this point, with Notre Dame off to such a fast start, Brian Kelly having the tough loss to Florida State week 1, you're kind of thinking, maybe Freeman is really turning the corner, and the beginning of last year was a fluke. And then for LSU, maybe you're thinking for Brian Kelly, last year was a bit of a fluke, and maybe LSU's taking a step back. So it's kind of interesting how things kind of flip-flopping, if you will, but also at the same time, maybe things are kind of evening themselves out, if you will. Maybe Freeman, because right now you're thinking, oh, Freeman is fantastic coach, but last year you're thinking, maybe he's really going to struggle. Now it's kind of, maybe the teeter-totter's kind of balancing itself out. The same with Brian Kelly. Expectations were getting sky high for LSU. Maybe now, LSU expectations getting sky high, and they're starting out, poorly. Maybe things kind of balancing themselves out. Not to say Marcus Freeman can't really take this to another level at Notre Dame, and not to say Brian Kelly can really bounce back. But sometimes things just kind of balance themselves out. So interesting stuff when you're watching Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame kind of the Marcus Freeman tenure kind of develop, and it's interesting watching Brian Kelly season 2 kind of take full tuition. But let's talk. So Penn State looks pretty good right now. Drew Aller playing pretty well. Penn State is a team. I talked a lot about Penn State in the offseason. They're a team where they have offensive weapons. Obviously, I just mentioned Drew Aller, Kaytron Allen, Nick Singleton. Kind of a similar story to a lot of Penn State teams, that there is the pieces in place, difference makers. But the main question is, they're going to have to get through Ohio State and/or Michigan. And when I say that is they could drop one of those games, still win the Big Ten championship. But yeah, Penn State, those two, that matchup, I forget who they play first. That matchup is gonna say a lot about this Penn State team. That's what I think. Kind of like they're kind of in the same boat of how I feel about Michigan a few years ago. Michigan, that's how I felt about Michigan in 2021. Michigan, under Hutchinson playing so well, Harbaugh kind of reviving his tenure. But the question was, let's see, okay, the final test. Let's see how they match up against Ohio State. Oh, they beat Ohio State? Okay, yep, that's how you know they were for real, win the Big Ten championship the next week. That's with Penn State. Penn State kind of hit a lull in the James Franklin era, and by that I mean, kind of they've taken a step back as far as, from 2016 was a long time from now, but they have kind of taken a step back in that regard from 2016. So kind of hit a lull in the James Franklin era. Let's see, when they play Penn State, when they play Michigan, even if they drop that first matchup to those two teams, do they look like the Penn State team that's really do they look like the Penn State team that can win the Big Ten and play at a high level and compete with anyone in the country, kind of like the 2016 Penn State team that not only was competitive with just about anyone in the country, but had high-level difference makers. So keep an eye on the Penn State Nittany Lions, off to a really nice start. Got an excellent win yesterday against Delaware. We'll see what they do moving forward. So, yeah, Oklahoma. Oklahoma, if you look at Oklahoma, excellent win against Arkansas State in week 1, but it looked like they struggled yesterday against SMU. So, I guess the question is what to make of the Oklahoma Sooners. I think maybe they're in that similar boat with Penn State a little bit. I think that Oklahoma's going to win a lot of games this year. I just don't. Is Oklahoma, I guess just what, they are the ultimate team where I would want to see, if you had the time machine, you would be so curious to see what their final record is. And I know you could say that for almost every team, but Oklahoma, that's the thing. You know they're going to win games. This is going to be at least a 8, 9 win, maybe 10 win team. I don't know, 11. 11 maybe that you might be getting a little greedy there. But to me, like if we had a time machine and we fast forward and we saw Oklahoma won 10 games this year, I'd be like, I wouldn't be super surprised. But also, if we saw they won, 7, 8, I think I'd be a little surprised, but I wouldn't be shocked just because, they are, maybe they are that roller coaster team because, obliterated Arkansas State. Now, I don't know how good of a team really Arkansas State is. That's what's kind of fun about early in college football season is the team has a dominant win. You find out the team they beat is really a poor team. But, yeah, and then not as good a showing yesterday against SMU. So that's what, talk about how things kind of balance themselves out. Oklahoma, maybe they just are a solid team. This is an 8, 9 win team, not quite yet a Big 12 contender, but maybe they are, maybe it just was a bad game and they really get back to playing like they did against Arkansas State and playing like they did last year against Oklahoma State where their offense is executing at a high level and their defense is improved and looks like a Brent Venables coach defense. So interesting how the Oklahoma football season is going to unfold, and I'm excited to see how many games they win this year and how they match up with Texas. Texas had their number last year. If they beat, kind of like with Penn State beating Michigan or Ohio State, if Oklahoma beats Texas, I think, maybe, I don't know if you sound all the alarm. Maybe you sound a few alarms that say, Oklahoma maybe has a legitimate shot to do something special this year. So got to beat Texas and, you feel like they have to beat Texas if they really want to be a Big 12 title contender. But yeah, Oklahoma appears that they can play at a high level. We'll just see if they can sustain consistency. Kind of in the same boat with Texas in that sense. Just can they sustain playing at a consistent high level? But yeah. So Ohio State, nice win over Youngstown State. It's cool to see Marvin Harrison have a better game. I think Kyle McCord. I don't know what to make of Kyle McCord. I feel like it's obviously a guy that was a high recruit, like most Ohio State quarterbacks. But you get the feel watching him, like, is he a guy that could hold him back in a bigger game? And that's the thing. Ohio State really has it rolling at this point where, they're going to have a huge talent advantage over just about everyone they play. But is Kyle McCord going to really hold them back from beating Michigan or even beating Penn State? Is he going to have a game where he is just not executing at a high enough level to win some big games? So I think that's the question for Ohio State. Ohio State, though, if you look at, if we're not talking about the quarterback position at Ohio State, if you look at this team overall, I mean, Jack Sawyer, Denzel Burke having a better season after a little bit of a down season. Denzel Burke, the corner. If you look at this Ohio State team, they are as talented as just about anyone in the country in regards to the number of NFL draft eligible guys who are ranked fairly highly in regard to their specific position. So if you look at Ohio State that way, they are a super talented a team overall with NFL draft caliber players. But the question is, is McCord going to play at a high level, and is this offense going to be consistently good enough to win the Big Ten championship and beat Michigan? And then if they do get back to the playoff, how do they match up? Can McCord make enough big-time throws to Harrison and Ibuka to win them a game against, if they meet a Georgia or a Florida State? How do they match up in that regard? But, yeah, I think that, that's what's interesting with Alabama losing because, when you talk about the playoff, Alabama always is a topic of discussion. I know that that loss to Texas doesn't eliminate them, but it certainly doesn't help them as far as, their road to the playoff. And then you look at LSU. LSU dropped the game. LSU you kind of had in the mix of maybe a playoff contender. But, yeah, USC and even Clemson, too. That's what's crazy about those three teams losing. LSU, Clemson, Alabama. Those are three teams that at one point I was really digging deep on, and it really was, you could really make a strong case for why they were going to have a really big season and do something special this year. So that's what's interesting about those three teams losing. But, yeah, I think that Clemson, I know it was Charleston Southern, but, that 66 points, Cade Klubnik passing efficiency, passing the ball efficient. That is what Clemson needs to play at a high level, and hopefully they get more games like that offensively. But you hope that there was kind of games where they did not play well and execute at a high level offensively. Clemson, you hope for Clemson that was more, the Duke game was more of a fluke, in that Charleston Southern was a game where they can kind of build their confidence and get their offense rolling. You hope that Duke was more of a fluke, and that their offense will look more so similar. I know you're not going to have the advantage over Charleston Southern you're not going to have a talent advantage like they had over Charleston Southern every week, but you hope that type of offensive production and play from Cade Klubnik is more so how they play the rest of the season, as opposed to the Duke game when they're turning the ball over, playing sloppy. So be interesting to watch Clemson this year. Hopefully they can try to rebound from a tough loss to Duke and play at a high level this year. But yeah. So I didn't talk about North Carolina, South Carolina. I think I talked about that last episode, but yeah, I just wanted to touch on. I had high hopes for South Carolina this year. I guess it's still early, but yeah, South Carolina under Rattler, I thought they were really going to take off this year. It's too bad they dropped that game against North Carolina, but South Carolina with a chance. Even if they don't beat Georgia next week, that is one of one of the SEC, I guess, bigger SEC games next week. Even if they don't win that game against Georgia, can South Carolina at least show that they are, they've done enough to improve, or they can go toe to toe with Georgia, even if they don't win the game? Can they at least be competitive? Can they at least be strong at both sides of the line of scrimmage against Georgia? I think that game will be indicative and say a lot about the South Carolina Gamecocks. So, that'll be an interesting matchup. And all right, you look at Georgia, and kind of like with the opposite side of the spectrum from Ohio State. If you look at Georgia, if you take away Georgia's team for a minute and you just look at Carson Beck, Carson Beck played pretty well those first couple games. You got to remember, UT Martin, Ball State, those are opponents where, that's about as comfortable in the pocket as he's going to get. Against better opponents, Carson Beck, the tools are there for Carson Beck. He's just got to be, they just want him to be sharp throughout the course of a season. So how does he handle a little bit more pressure? Now, Georgia's offensive line is good enough where he's going to have still some clean pockets against better opponents, but how does he handle a little bit of that pressure? How does he throw when he's going to have to roll to his left a little bit or step up more. So that's the main question I have with Carson Beck. How is his throwing when everything is not completely comfortable, when the play action, when guys aren't wide open on play action, where you're going against corners who can win some contested catches over your talented wide receivers. So Carson Beck, things are about as smooth as sailing through the first 2 weeks as they get. Against South Carolina, it's going to be a little bit rockier of a ship, if you will, but still it's going to be, it should be fairly smooth sailing, but how does Carson Beck deal with things not being completely comfortable? That is the main question for him. But he is a talented guy. All the tools are there, and credit though, he has played fairly well through those first 2 games. But yeah, I guess we'll discuss Georgia a little bit more. We'll discuss their team. So I've just kind of watched the highlights, but my feel with Georgia this year is, are they talented to win a national championship this year? I'm going to say yes, but I think that this, even if as much as they say don't get complacent, don't get satisfied, when you have a lot of guys who've won 2 in a row and you have a coach who's won 2 in a row, it's just kind of almost human nature that you're not, I shouldn't say human. It's almost just like it's hard to get that kind of momentum and get that hungry again. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, it's kind of like if, you're out in the desert and there's no glass of water. You're walking in the desert and you can't find a glass of water for a long time. But you have another guy who's out in the desert and there's a glass of water you can drink a glass of water every few steps. You're not gonna have that same hunger and drive to want to find water. Now, obviously, Georgia isn't chasing water. They're chasing a national championship, but you see my point. It's hard to kind of get that type of hunger and momentum when you've done something 2 years in a row. So Georgia, obviously, everything's in place. With Carson Beck at least showing that he can play, fairly well. That is a huge, because that was the main question. Carson Beck. I know I just talked about Carson Beck for a minute, but that was the main question, was the quarterback play. Because offensive line strong, Brock Bowers talented, good receivers. They did a good job in the transfer portal, adding depth to at receiver. Strong defense. Talent on the defensive line, strong secondary, experienced secondary now at this point as well, with guys like Bullard, Starks in his second year. So everything in place for Georgia to win it all. They just have to really continue to execute, and then hopefully Carson Beck continues to grow up, and hopefully they can kind of sustain as much hunger as possible. So, yeah, so a lot of good things. Georgia's showing some good things, even though they're playing against opponents a lot superior or a lot less talented than them, especially in Ball State and UT Martin. But at least they have shown a lot of good things offensively and played at a high level once again defensively. All right, so what else do we want to discuss here? Yeah, but fun day of college football. Sometimes it's kind of hard to really lock in. I was on the road traveling yesterday, so sometimes it's kind of hard to lock in from a game from noon, 3:30, and in a primetime game. But yeah, I try to do the best I can, catch highlights. NFL. We'll talk. So there's some guys emerging for the NFL draft. Keon Coleman, the Florida State wide receiver, has certainly rose his draft stock. I think the question for me is he wide receiver 2 behind Marvin Harrison, and then Shadur Sanders making a case to be a first round pick in the 2024 NFL draft. Marvin Harrison he had a better game yesterday. Denzel Burke going to be one of the best corners. We saw Kool-Aid McKinstry going to be one of the best corners. So a lot of the guys at the top playing well, even though Marvin Harrison, maybe not his best game against Indiana. But yeah, some of the guys that are skyrocketing up, Shadur Sanders at quarterback, Keon Coleman at wide receiver. Both those guys making a case to be probably the second best position in their respected at their own respected position. So Shedeur Sanders making a case for QB2. It's really going to be hard to pass Caleb Williams, and then Keon Coleman making a position for wide receiver 2, even though it's going to be hard to pass Marvin Harrison as wide receiver 1. Because that's the thing with the NFL draft. Like you look at, like if you remember, Derek Stingley was kind of, he had such a great freshman year in 2019. He kind of was penciled in for the number 1 corner, multiple years in advance. Kind of like, Marvin Harrison. The way he played as a true freshman late in the season in that Rose Bowl, he was almost kind of penciled not necessarily after that game, but a little bit. He was almost kind of penciled in, a lock to be the number 1 wide receiver. And the play Caleb Williams demonstrated as a true freshman when he was at Oklahoma, kind of almost that already started the conversation for him, quarterback 1. So it's really, once you kind of had, it's a term in. But it's a term that they use in the field of psychology. It's like once you come to a conclusion on something, or you come to a strong opinion on something, you need a lot of evidence to try to establish a new opinion on something. So a lot of people already locked into Marvin Harrison, the wide receiver 1. So they would need. So for Coleman to surpass him, a lot of people would need to see a lot of evidence of Coleman playing at a high level, and they need to see a lot of ability from Coleman to get off that initial opinion. But what's going to be interesting is, all the buzz with Caleb Williams. A lot of people talking about how he is probably the best prospect since Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck, you talk about, and then last night you're watching Texas, Vince Young. If you follow recruiting, those were guys that, perfect ratings by 24/7. Some people called Andrew Luck probably the closest thing to a sure bet prospect, can't miss prospect, almost perfect prospect, whatever term you want to use to a complete, total blue chip guy that's basically not going to be a bust and going to be a high-level Pro Bowl player consistently year in and year out if he's healthy. Caleb Williams kind of getting that label. Caleb Williams got a chance to really do some nice things this season, and in most people's eyes, done enough to really establish himself as that QB1. This quarterback class, we kind of talked about this earlier. Quarterback class is going to be super strong. Ewers, Penix, Drake May, McCarthy. There's just a lot of. What's going to be interesting is Caleb Williams probably going to stay QB1. What's going to be the most interesting is QB2 through QB5 conversation. That's going to be very fascinating, that discussion, because it could range from we could see Shedeur Sanders QB2, we could see McCarthy QB2. Even the way Ewers played last night, maybe he is in the discussion for QB2. So you could see as many as maybe 4 or 5 guys in that discussion for QB2. Mel Kiper has Quinn Ewers QB6. I think that's too low. I think that's too hot, whatever. I think he should be 2 or 3. Right now, I would say in Bo Nix, too. Bo Nix, I keep forgetting about Bo Nix. Right now, I would say Caleb Williams 1. To me, I would probably go Bo Nix 2, just because of his arm strength, athletic, just his all-around game. And then 3, probably Penix 3, Ewers 4, McCarthy 5. That would be tough to put Shedeur Sanders 6. But that just goes to show, not that, people, my opinion, maybe not as respected as guys like Kiper and some of the bigger guys in the NFL draft community. But for me to put, watching a lot of football, to put Shedeur Sanders at number 6, I think that really puts that really opens people's eyes to how strong this quarterback class is. So really strong quarterback class. It'll be interesting to keep an eye on, the rank, how people rank QB2 through actually QB6. So interesting stuff there. Even Drake, I didn't even have Drake May in the top 6. Maybe Drake May is, some people's QB2, 3. So yeah, keep an eye on this quarterback class. Certainly will be fascinating. But yeah, Florida State got a nice win last night over Southern Miss. I say nice win, Southern Miss, certainly a team Florida State should win. But yeah, Florida State, that was a game where, they just needed to, I don't think you already showed people a lot of what you could do week 1 against LSU. That was a game where it's just kind of like, yeah, you just really need to go out, play at a high level, do some nice things, and just do what you need to do to come home with a win, even if, unless it was completely ugly, you just wanted to show enough, get that win and start preparing for Clemson and some of the tougher ACC opponents on the road. Not that you completely overlook that game, but Florida State, they've already proven they can win some games. Now let's start really locking in on getting better and getting some wins over quality ACC opponents. But yeah, so what else do we want to discuss here? Yeah, Clemson. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking in my head. Is it Clemson, Florida State next week? I'm gonna have to look. I don't have my phone on me. I'm gonna have to look that up. Clemson, Florida State. That might be next week. So, but yeah, Ohio State, Clemson, Florida State on the horizon. Notre Dame, Ohio State coming up. Those are key matchups. And like last night, I was thinking Texas, Alabama. Those are the matchups college football fans really want to see. They want to see two traditional programs go at it. Texas, Alabama, two traditional programs. I know they've kind of taken totally different paths after that 2009, 2010 national championship game, but they, Texas seems to be kind of veering back on the right path. Maybe, that game to me, I kind of sound like your high school English teacher, but to me, that those games are kind of really symbolic in college football. And I don't want to get too deep here, but this is kind of, if you kind of look at that, if you want to see symbolism and stuff, that game, if you remember, Texas kind of was the powerhouse for a long time, and Alabama's dynasty was on the rise. If you remember, they had lost the year prior to Florida in the SEC championship. The Nick Saban dynasty, though, was about to, with the championship win there, they were about to take the and then Colt McCoy gets hurt, and that almost was symbolic of, I don't mean this any disrespect to Colt McCoy, but that was almost kind of symbolic of Texas, the Texas dynasty kind of coming to an end as far as for a few year span, and the Alabama dynasty taking control of college football. But now, and then Ewers gets hurt last year, and Alabama still wins to kind of show that their dynasty's going, and Texas still not quite there, but that win against Texas, does that mean the Alabama dynasty, getting really deep here, does that mean the Alabama dynasty maybe is kind of taking the path that they're going to take a step back, and that Texas is kind of moving back to the team we once thought? It's kind of an interesting take, and people, if you're you're a pagan, you believe in signs. I'm not into the astrology necessarily, but if you're a believer in kind of symbolism, in signs before a complete change, then maybe that's a sign that maybe Alabama's on the road to taking a step back, and Texas is becoming kind of the program they were under Mac Brown with Vince Young, Colt McCoy. So interesting stuff there. But thanks for tuning in this episode of the Brand Parcel Show. Stay tuned for more episodes and clips from the show.